pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Nancy, roll call, please.
Ackerman? Here. Dye? Here. Gentlemen? Here. LaPointe?
Here.
Paul Scott is excused. He's working. White?
Here.
Solinger?
Here. Thank you. Again, welcome everybody. I think we've got enough seats. We've got 2 or 3 we can fill in if we need to, that's fine. We're glad you're here tonight. We're going to be talking about Acme Creek and events that have happened in the last few weeks. And I thought it would be good, we're going to open for limited public comment. But I also would like to go through some action items that have already been done. So many questions have come up, what's been fixed, has something been fixed, was something needed to be fixed, whatever it is. So I thought I'd go through some of those first. That might assist then if people have comments that you've already heard something that's happened or not, whichever that may be. If you don't mind, we'll do that. When we do go into actual comments, I will ask to see, kind of show of hands how many so we can judge our time and make sure people get a reasonable time to make their comments. Acme Township officials are all very concerned about what's happened on 9/21 especially. And any major rainstorm dropped, and when this major rainstorm dropped about 3 inches of rain or more, we experienced runoff in Acme Creek, no doubt about it. Many of you saw it. I saw it early Sunday morning, so I was aware of it. Yesterday, we did have a review of the status of many of the things that are going on and repairs and things that needed to go on to this site, caused by 2 100-year storm events, both 9/7/14 and 9/21/14. We held that meeting yesterday. We had the DEQ there. We had Gordy Frazier, BGT representatives, Elmer's, Global Environmental, Soil Erosion Office from the county, Gosling Schubeck, ourselves, and some representatives from Myers and Rockford Construction. So that was this was really an engineering review of what's going on, what's been fixed, what needs to be looked at. The primary objective of that meeting was to ensure that the necessary actions were identified and implemented to ensure that further soil erosions into Acme Creek won't happen again. That's our goal. Will not happen again. We reviewed what's happened during the last 2 storm events and what actions have been taken to date based on Dr. Grobel's July 4th site visit and letter of July 14th, along with most recent visit after this rain Monday. So this last Monday when we had our rain event, Dr. Grobel, who is with us here tonight, actually visited the site during the rain to make sure things were okay, we were in good shape. There were some erosion compliance notices put out by the county soil erosion. Some of you have heard about that. All of those, like Pete Brusky addressed and said, all of those have been repaired. Many of them were repaired way before that meeting yesterday, but all of them have been repaired. Many of them were not just repaired, but additions felt that was needed to appropriately stop runoff in various areas. And to that point, I'd like to point out, we did check the creek today. That creek looked pretty good today. If anybody else did, that's fine. It is the creek of the township. There was a lot of extra work done, and I got a report given to me at 6 tonight, so I want to make sure that you're with. Additional berms and things were done on some of the roads area. Silt fence again today, additional was put in during the rain. So they were watching the rain, anything that was happening to make sure it needed to be done. Working on the basins. Additional silt fence installed at the end of basin number 1. There was 10 to 15 people on site today working on that site in the rain. So if any of you are out in the rain today, that's a pretty tough thing to do in a rainy day to work on a site like that. But we have 15 people out there working to do things that would help to prevent any problems on this. All silt fences have been constructed and maintained. There was a question earlier about in accordance with the Grand Traverse County and DEQ permitting process. And we do have 3 representatives of DEQ with us tonight, so if we have questions, we'll have them either say a word or at least try to help us answer some of those, and I hope they don't mind that. Brian? Nope. I think that's, we offered to come, and I think it's important that we all want to understand where we're at and what we're doing there. We do have NPDS reports. These are reports from the stormwater operator, a requirement by the DEQ. I have them available from the site. They're usually always kept on site when you have a construction. These are the reports of any rain events and that are kept by that site coordinator. So we have those. We have discussed many issues about the stormwater basins, both Basin 1, which is south of Myers Store on the main road, and Basin 2 by the internal roundabout. It's west of the internal roundabout. There is some questions about the designs being inconsistent with the best practices that we approved. We are looking with Gordy Frazier, our team, King and McGregor, the original environmental team, Dr. Grobel, and others, to make sure that they meet the design criteria or will meet the design criteria as required by our site. That's very important. Will be stepping up regular site visits by Dr. Grobel. I don't know if you're out there today, Chris, at all, but you were out there Monday, I know. And so some of that will be done so that we make sure that, spot visits are good, that we see things going on. I or any of the board members went out there, we could see something, but we're not sure if it's right or wrong. We're not the experts. We need people that know those things to do that. The developer has agreed to additional stormwater sampling. We have to set up what that will be. So I just wanted to give you some flavor of a lot of things that have been done since this event. We, again, as the township officials, all take this very seriously. We want to make sure we understand it, what it takes to fix anything. If there is anything more to be fixed, make sure that we can protect the creek in the best manner. So with that, I will open to public comments at this time. Is there anybody, can I see a show of hands of people that want to make public comments? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anybody else? Okay. Who's in the front row? We'll start in the front row. Jim, we'll let you first. We'll try to keep this to about 3 to 4 minutes. We really want to. We want to get through everything tonight. We do want to hear comments. The board needs to talk about them once you've heard the comments. So, thank you.
Jim Hefner, 4050 Bayberry Lane in Williamsburg. I would really like to know where the failure was in this process, because I sat through a lot of the planning commission meetings, and Chris talked about how he designed a retention system that the DEQ didn't need to permit because there was going to be no runoff into Acton Creek. I realize that this is a construction process, and I have a lot of faith in the developer, but was it a matter that we aren't updating our regulations because of global warming or these frequencies of high volume rains, or was it a matter of the developer not doing the correct engineering, implementing the engineering, or was the engineering firm? Where is the failure at? One of the things that makes Acme stand out is the bay. I mean, the old thing, a view of the bay is half your pay. Well, a view of chocolate milk is not half your pay, okay? Felt like I got robbed. One time, okay, hey, and then we hear from our county officials that it's a natural occurrence, sediment coming out of the creek. We know that's not the case. We saw it up above the development where all the creeks were running clear, and below the development was chocolate milk. And the county soil and erosion people came out and looked at it and said, well, everything was in compliance. That wasn't what we were seeing as residents. I'd just like to know where the blame lies and what the correction is in the future for other developments here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody else in the front row? Just take it by row. Next. Good. Please state your name and where you live.
Sure. My name is Terry Hansen. I live at 6142 Gilbert Avenue, about a quarter mile from here. I have 240 feet of Acme Creek. I I'm not a fisherman, but I enjoy my little piece of heaven. I watch my creek, I watch the animals, I watch the minks, the geese, whatever's passing through. The king salmon, not too many anymore. But I watch the ebb and flow. I don't think there's any danger my house is going to get flooded, but I watch my creek. And I understand there was a catastrophic, a lot of rain. And I've taken my mountain bike and I go take a look, and I don't see a whole lot of stuff, but I don't know the whole site plan. But what I'm concerned about is future when there's pavement, when everything is done. I don't want to see an oil slick coming by my house. That's what I'm concerned about when it gets all done.
Thank you. Anybody across? Go ahead, we'll just take it line in and then. John, right?
Okay. John Stinson, Peace Valley Road. I just thought it was interesting that there was no, that the grass cover was entirely stripped and left to be bare sand. Should be an easy thing for, I've had civil engineering technology training. It's an easy thing to figure out, what the water flow is going to be and whether you have sufficient basins and other things to prevent it. But one thing I heard was that they may only develop Myers and leave the rest of it for another year or so. And if it's just going to be sand, it needs grass, it needs something. It needs straw, it needs a bunch of things. And really, I thought as a township, we learned that from Lockheath because, of course, they've had huge problems with runoff there. And one of the things Jim told me was that he's now, quote unquote, a great believer in grass. And his development was really cost a lot of extra money, and there was a lot of runoff because of just bare ground. So I'd like to see, make sure that there is coverage over the long run, and not just for the short term here, because it's going to be another big deluge sometime along the way, and whatever we have figured out needs to, the general area needs protection rather than just runoff basin. Thank you.
When I talked earlier, I will answer some of your, just because it's important. There has been a tremendous since the last event of seeding, matting and put in, so it was a lot of work made. I appreciate that. Virginia.
Good evening, Mr. Zollinger, trustees and staff. Virginia Teagle, 4810 Bartlett. It really took a lot of restraint to not bring my 3-foot pile of documents, and I'm going to ask permission in advance to speak longer to this issue due to the hours that I and the Planning Commission spent over 2.5 years' time. So, like many of you,
Let me ask you before.
I timed myself 7 minutes. I'm wondering, as many others are, is this an error in design or implementation, and what you will do to find out. I want to provide you with some additional incentive to provide our waters of Grand Traverse Bay. We spent $10 million to purchase shoreline, $347,000 of which are Acme Township funds. The master plan survey states that 83% of the residents and businesses that participated placed a high priority on water quality, protecting the streams, watersheds, and the bay, which is also a top priority in the Grand Traverse County Master Plan. And of course, we have shared watersheds. I looked up because I wanted to put a value. I know that the people in this township recognize economics. I know that what drives this board, and that's the position you ran on. So I wanted to put a price on the bay. I did find the Michigan Economic Development Corporation had these statistics. Blue economy assets. Annually, $4 billion from boaters, $2 billion from recreational fishing, $955 million from coastal tourism. You can decide for yourselves what portion of that could be attributed to Grand Traverse Bay. I also noticed that you have an item on your agenda for October 7th, and I'm concerned about any further minor amendments being approved while this is in process. I'm concerned about the percent of impervious surface. I'm a little confused about that amendment and whether or not it overlays the existing design and if the changes have been applied for through the DEQ. Thank you, you've answered a number of my 12 questions. I did expect that this would be included in the public comment
The board
portion.
has it, but
Right.
we got your request for that later today in the package you already put out.
Okay.
So we appreciate the.
So I referenced, in the time we spent on the planning commission, there was much back and forth about stormwater management. And I'd like to read a few portions that actually came from the developer. The portions of the system were to be constructed during phase 1 to take advantage of mass earthwork required to construct a corridor road, calculated based on the actual runoff volumes generated by phase 1. Preliminary sizing of the basins for build out indicated that little, if any, of phase 1 runoff would ever enter the wetlands. And also the requirement for back-to-back 100-year storm events for the Wetland Protection Act. And I'm not sure how you measure the 200 years. Anyway, if anybody wants to look at that. Also, one of the requirements of the permit was to be provided the as-built plans once the proposed stormwater management system was implemented. And I'm curious as to when those will be provided. I'm glad to hear that you mentioned sampling, additional sampling would be done. I think it's imperative that that be done immediately. And in fact, I would like all of you to invite all of you. Watershed Center will be having a training session this Saturday. I think that there's room for some awareness on the part of members of the board when making these decisions. I've extended an invitation over the 15 years that I've participated in the Adopt a Stream program. And I will be doing that sampling on Yuba Creek in the next 2 weeks. And if any of you would like to participate, I will schedule it based on your availability. I would also like to refer to a couple of the sections in the DEQ plan. I knew it was going to come in handy keeping this stuff in my basement the last couple of years. Oh, I thought these were really interesting. I have the overview that might help some of you that aren't so familiar. I see you don't have any visuals tonight. So here's the overview. And also, I particularly like this one because it shows the topography of the site. And also this one shows the drainage basins. I'll hold it up for the audience. So the basins in question are Basin 1 and 2, and it's my understanding Basin 2 is not fully constructed. Okay, back to the DEQ permit. Number 1, all work shall be completed in accordance with the attached plan. I would very much like to know that. Number 4, has to do with the fabric erosion or straw bales constructed immediately adjacent to the wetland boundary along the entire length of the wetland area. This erosion barrier shall be maintained in good working order throughout the duration of the project. Number 18, another particular interest of mine. If any change or deviation from the permitted activity becomes necessary, the permittee shall request in writing a revision of the permitted activity and/or mitigation plan from the DEQ. Such revision request shall include complete documentation supporting modification revised plans detailing the proposed modification. Proposed modifications must be approved in writing by the DEQ prior to being implemented. So, very curious if that's taken place. Appreciate your time. And also those comments about the DEQ permit relate to the minor amendment that you'll be reviewing. And last, I feel that I've earned the right to get a tour of the property and see for myself how it's been implemented. And I very much welcome that with the experts that are here. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I've added to Virginia about testing, the township does, there's been a lot of misconceptions. We still do water testing, Tom Hinkle does it, of Acme Creek, Cuba Creek, and other areas. And anybody that wants to see those reports, we'd be glad to share them. That's, I told the last couple of months of them to look at, so that is still being done by our township. Next, anybody else that wants to speak, you put up your hand, we'll, Rochelle. And then we'll get Brian and you after Rochelle.
Shouldn't take too long. First, I'd like to thank everyone that lives in the area, the residents living near the bay and those living along the Acme Creek where the spill occurred, showing where the piles of mud and piles of clay coming off the village of Grand Traverse Meyer development and into our tributaries, and that it has not gone unnoticed. Our neighbors have shared their letters and their photos, so there can be no whitewashing of facts. This watershed disaster should not be allowed to be swept under a corporate rug. These same residents will now be noticing more of what is going on with the development, I'm sure of that. I have 3 questions to the state, the county, and the township specialist, and I'm positive you're going to answer some of them, working to rectify this mess that we now have in our waterways. What is the clean up plan, and who is responsible for the costs that it incurs? How much mud and clay was actually washed into the watershed from the village of Grand Traverse Meyer property? And what type of water retention structures for best practice will be implemented for future protection of Acme Creek and our watershed, and who will be responsible for monitoring this area? And then in closing, I just wanted to make those of us who are Acme residents aware that the village of Grand Traverse is also looking at possibly changing their development, and will need some major zoning changes so that they can meet their marketing demands. And so you should all be aware that that's going to be going on here in Acme Township sometime this year, I'm sure. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you. Brian.
Brian Kelly. Good evening. I've been an Acme Creek user for 30 years. I rode the school bus each day along M72 and Lauper Road, passing by the VGT site. This developer, the state, the county, and this township have failed to protect our creek and bay. Why must I read news about this from the newspaper and not get it directly from my township? We have a website. There should be daily status updates on that website. Why must community members file Freedom of Information Act requests to get documents and status updates? The developer has been sending daily status updates on this situation, but they are not being shared with the public. In July, township residents paid for a consultant to inspect the VGT site. He found numerous deficiencies. That report was kept quiet. I have attached it to my comments, which I have submitted via email. It was not shared with the board, and it was not shared with the community that paid for it. Even after the September 5th Creek fiasco, that report was still withheld. That is unacceptable. This board must take action so that future reports are proactively shared with the community via the township website. That should be mandatory. Had that report been shared, we very well might have averted these multiple fiascos. Dr. Grobel said in the Record Eagle that the needed changes that he had recommended had not been made, and that there, quote, would have been far less or no impact if they had taken those recommendations seriously, unquote. Why did the township not follow up on this? They did nothing. No one from the township bothered to verify that the changes had been made. Dr. Grobel was ignored. I am a man of action. I walked that site on Sunday, and I have photographs of countless silt fence deficiencies. On Wednesday, I again checked the site, and the deficiencies in the part of the site I walked remained. Those look like the same deficiencies that were identified in Dr. Grobel's report from July. I looked at the photos there. I visited the site this morning. I saw workers there. When I approached them, I was told by Steve Folksmara that the owners of the site did not want anyone on the property due to bad press and that I had to leave. I wish I could have seen the site improvements and the stormwater controls working properly, because I would like to report that to you today, but I did not get to see those. One thing I did see there that was kind of curious was a sewer, and on top of the sewer was a generator. Generator was connected to a pump in the bottom of the sewer, and it was pumping fluid out of the sewer towards the silt fence and towards Acme Creek. I took photos of this. It seemed to be an unusual thing. The workers told me they were pumping water out of a piece of equipment. There's been a failure at all levels to protect our most important resource in this community. We have been unable to rely upon those we pay to inspect this site and protect our creeks and beaches. On September 24th, the County Director of Soil Erosion said in a letter, "It is apparent that the project manager was not properly monitoring the actual site conditions and ensuring the contractor had installed the erosion control measures in the proper sequence. The contractor did not have basin number 2 completed, and runoff had been diverted from entering the basin, thus causing the silt fences to become overloaded during the last storm." This letter is included in my comment. So we can point to Mother Nature all we want, but if the critical aspects of the stormwater control system were not completed, we can't expect that system to work. That was not Mother Nature. It was a developer who assured this community that the Trout Creek and Bay would be protected, but then did not complete essential elements of the plan. Time and again, they asked for changes to the plan to accelerate construction of the Myers store while they ignored the threat to the creek. This topic should be a standing agenda item at the start of our future board meetings. The public should be able to ask questions at that time. I noticed that this is not on our agenda for our Tuesday board meeting. Thank you.
One comment, Brian, I'd like to make. I believe that this quote, I think the public needs to know that. Dr. Grobel's request back in July was answered and was in the documents available, and the board has seen those. That everything at that site was fixed other than seeding, I believe. Is that a fair statement, Chris? We have pictures from them that was fixed.
That's a fair statement, but seating was the issue.
A
not the
critical
site
issue. Yeah, we agree with that. But everything else was
95% of the
fixed,
issue.
documented, and we have that. So
Right.
thank you.
I have a couple hundred photos I'll be submitting to the township to show the plans.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, back behind the camera. Shirley.
Don't worry, it's very short. I'm Charlene Abernethy, 4312 Westridge. Thought a lot about what to say tonight, and I decided to say that I'm disgusted. Like others, I sat through many meetings about stormwater concerning this development. We were told, oh no, we're protecting the creek, nothing's going to get in the creek. Obviously, that nothing has happened. And I don't believe that storm even got close to being what the creek was supposed to be protected from. My questions are, was this incompetence? Was it corner cutting or blatant disregard for the permits and law?
Anybody else? Make sure I've seen all of that. Anybody? Hearing none, I'll close the comments at this time. Let's go on with our approval of agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Inquiry into conflicts of interest of anybody. Seeing none. Correspondence. Attached to our packages of correspondence from Bob Darby. It's regarding testing of the creek. And another letter we had was concerning citizens of Acme Township with a lot of questions and questioning some of the consultants we used. So those are attached to our correspondence. It was not asked by either one to be read in the meeting, so we will not read those, but they are available and they will be on our website. None of them, yes, when the minutes and stuff on the
They're
website.
available right now.
Are they, yes, they are there now with the agenda, that's right. Thank you, Nancy. New business. We're here tonight to discuss communications to the public and status. Or I'd like to start that discussion. Brian, if you don't mind, from the DEQ's perspective, is there anything you'd like to say tonight while you're here?
Absolutely.
Good, we'd like you to
Excuse
do
me,
that.
Mr. Zallinger?
Jay, it'd be really nice if he came over here. We
Well,
can't hear
we'll do
him.
that. If you can't hear him, that's fine. Ryan doesn't mind.
Yeah, he needs to stand up and so his voice is
Speak
better.
this way? How's that?
Good.
We can hear you.
My staff was originally contacted, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, on September 5th from a concerned citizen. Following our protocol, the primary law and agency that deals with matters of water quality related to erosion from construction sites is what we call Part 91, and it's administered by the county enforcing agent. So when DEQ receives those complaints, they're referred to the county enforcing agent, and that's what was done in this case. Following week, we got some feedback from the county enforcing agent that they had taken some action out there and gone out and looked at it, and the feedback we got at that time, I believe, really indicated that things were being addressed. Subsequent to that, another event occurred, and so we have a staff person that deals with what we call our construction stormwater program, and he also works with the county enforcing agents and the other local agencies that are involved with the soil erosion program. That's Justin Bragg out of our Gaylord office. And Justin went out and did some inspections and some field work with the county soil erosion agency, I believe, and evaluated the site, found some concerns, was making sure that the county was directing them to take some corrective action. So that's what our involvement has been to date. But I want to make sure people understand that the primary law that deals with soil erosion from construction sites is Part 91 and is administered by the county, and they have primary responsibility in that regard. Our involvement beyond that, it deals with what we call a construction stormwater permit. And I want to make sure people understand that construction stormwater permit falls under what we call a notice of coverage, which means the DEQ does not do a review of any plans or anything like that ahead of that process. That application is basically something that the developer files, pays a fee, and then they receive a permit called essentially what's a permit called a notice of coverage, saying that they're responsible for the results of that. But I want to make sure you understand, we do not do a review of any plans or any stormwater controls through that process. That's almost entirely handled basically by paperwork exchanged in Lansing. But what that does is now they have a permit, essentially, that they're required to comply with, which they should not have a discharge of anything that's injurious to the waters of the state. Obviously, in this case, that did not occur. And so, we're pursuing the project in that regard. But we're strictly looking at what's happening in the creek as a result of a rain event. And basically, that program more or less falls in a kind of what I call a response type program. When there's a problem, we go out and deal with it, but there's really not a lot of our involvement ahead of that. So I know, what was your name again?
Virginia Teagle, sir.
Yeah, she mentioned a DEQ permit, and I'm not exactly sure what permit she's talking about. She might be talking about the 303 wetlands permit, which really doesn't deal with this particular issue. It doesn't deal with runoff from a construction site. That's primarily falls under Part 31 and Part 91, which is administered by the county enforcement agent.
I'd be happy to give you a copy of it. It's
Yeah, my staff
to
issued it,
DEQ.
so I know what permit you're talking about, I think. It's probably, yeah, it's Robbins Wetlands permit.
Either way.
That has a different purpose. What we can and can't control under that permit does not deal with things that are in the upland construction areas, so.
So what is DEQ's involvement in the future going forward?
Well, at this point, we're going to continue to monitor the site, and if there continues to be a problem, we'll potentially pursue escalated enforcement against the landowner. Ultimately, the landowner is the responsible party.
Since you're here and you
Mhm.
so astutely pointed out that I referenced the wrong permit for your department.
Well, that's not
Should
the
we
wrong
have-
permit.
should
The
we have
permit does
someone
apply
from the
to
Water
the site.
Resources Division? I'm
Excuse-
confused.
That permit does apply to the site, but it doesn't deal really with the issue that is the primary issue at hand, which is the construction site on the upland, being bare with the soil eroding off of it. That deals with dredging and filling wetlands.
Okay, thanks.
Who's the county enforcement officer for this project?
Pete Brewski,
Through
right?
Pete Brewski, I believe. Yeah.
Did you have any other projects either being developed or developed that in September with all this rain had any similar issues of runoff or retention pond?
Not that I know of. I mean, I don't know of any construction site in that
I'm not talking about here, I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
not that I know of, though. I do know on that September 5th event, we got complaints throughout the watershed of problems like that. So that's, that event was significant rainfall, and we had washouts and rain that occurred on other streams. We had several complaints that came in around that time frame, not just this one.
When you do encounter a problem of this type, what generally is your approach to it besides monitoring? Do you?
First thing we usually do is make reference to the county enforcing agent. Subsequent to that, Justin or other staff that work in that program get involved. First thing we're going to be after is trying to get the site under control. Okay, then after that, the next thing we would look at is some sort of enforcement action if it was deemed necessary. So
What's the time schedule
for,
this control?
well, right now, Justin's working with them, on a routine basis. There are some problems at that site, and they are not, in my opinion, going to be able to readily resolve them right away. But we're looking into grabbing some additional resources and expertise to try to provide some additional direction. But, there are some serious concerns there. So do I expect it to be fixed by tomorrow? Absolutely not.
And do we expect to see more runoff then?
I would not be surprised.
Thank you.
And that's equally frustrating to us. But we just had the meeting yesterday. Obviously, we're coming up to speed on it. But ultimately, we're going to hold the contractor, or not the contractor, excuse me. We're going to hold the landowner responsible if we have continued discharges from the site. But our enforcement process takes time. So I ask you to be patient. It's not like we go out and write a ticket. So,
Gordon, you have to I'll make sure the board gets any questions asked.
Well, I've got several questions. I don't know what your process is here.
Well, Brian's up here. There's something for
Okay,
Brian.
well, I'm not sure if it's Brian or the county or whatever.
we can always go away and come back. I'm not I'm here to.
Well, I guess I wasn't here when this last event happened. I guess my question is, from your standpoint, or who would have the knowledge, would that be considered a major issue of long-term impact on the bay and on the creek? I know that these things recover themselves, so.
It depends on who you talk to, so I gotta be careful with this answer. There are worse things that could happen. Everybody knows that. Okay. There are some problems with soil particles obviously being discharged to the creek. Aesthetics and visual is definitely one of the first things that hits people. There are some other long-term effects that it can have on the ecosystem. I would probably argue if it was heavier material, such as sand and gravels that had migrated, and not the clays, it would actually be worse. The clays present a unique problem, though. The clays present an extremely difficult problem to solve for them on the site now that it's all been exposed. And I've talked to some of our other people in the state, our statewide construction, stormwater, soil erosion people, and once a site gets torn open like this and it has clays on it, it is extremely difficult to manage until you get that site either seeded or get the impervious surfaces placed on it. So there's going to be a struggle in that regard. Particularly, I know they have made some attempts to do some seeding. The weather hasn't cooperated so far, but I'm not saying that's an excuse.
So clay isn't as bad of clay is, from an aesthetic standpoint, is.
It's still a soil material that's in the water. It causes a problem with turbidity. It'll move into the bay, and over time, if it's only in small amounts, like that have occurred so far, it'll probably acclimate and dissipate. But it still can cover some things ecologically. It's not as significant, though, as like a sand or gravel would be. And I'm going to kind of refer to my expert, because he's more of the expert in that area. I'm an engineer, so I might be outside of my area of expertise a little bit. But.
And part of the reason I asked the question is I have been running Brian down here late this afternoon at about 4:30 or whatever, looking at the creek down here, and it was muddy, and I don't know what the source was.
It's still a violation, in my opinion, of what we call the narrative standards for water quality.
But what surprised me was I looked at it as it crossed Acme Road and coming through the culvert, and it was gushing through there because of the heavy rain, and it was muddy. Went down further, and it was muddy down there.
So I don't know where that was
Well,
coming
most of what
from.
we understand, from I haven't seen it myself, I'm kind of relying on the discussions that we had yesterday and what Justin has seen is the vast majority of if you see that milkiness in the water that's suspended in the whole water column,
Yeah.
that's clay particles. They're extremely small and they're suspended colloidally, as we say. And so unlike sands and gravels, they don't settle or move along the bottom. They'll stay suspended almost indefinitely in some cases.
What I found interesting was then driving north, I stopped at Yuba Creek.
Yeah,
Same thing.
yeah. Well, that's one of the things that Greg talked about.
So, I mean, I was kind of surprised.
There is a sort of a complicating factor here in that Greg was talking, he works with a lot of the watershed groups in our watershed management plans and things that are done to monitor and test different watersheds. In this area, Acme and Yuba Creek have had problems like this in the past. They've shown, because there's clay in the watershed, which is not as common as it is downstate. So yes, to see it in Yuba Creek where there is no construction occurring, when you walk along the edge of Acme Creek, you can see where there's natural exposed clay right along the lake. And I'm sure when you have, right along the river, when you have a big enough storm event or a flood event, some of that's going to get picked up and moved. And past monitoring of those streams has shown that. But this is above and beyond that.
No, I realize that,
You've
but
got X many acres of clay material exposed, and once it starts to move and migrate, it's extremely difficult to get it out, to get it back. And it's also extremely difficult to get it out of suspension in the water. So if you have a retention treatment pond that's supposed to slow the water down, let things settle, clays won't settle.
just as a follow-up, you mentioned that from your perspective, there's still some serious issues with it, opening up the soil and
Yes.
no longer has any cover and whatever. But it won't be fixed, I think you said it won't be fixed immediately.
I'm not gonna come in here and promise sunshine, because I
guess
definitely think there's problems.
Have you conveyed to the developer and to Elmer's and those people what you think the solution is, or do you not know what the solution is?
We have given them some ideas, but to be honest, it's their problem to solve. I'm trying to find some resources for them to pull in some other people who might have expertise. But, it's not, we have people who work in soil erosion all the time, but this one's a big one. I mean, this one's a significant site with some significant problems. We have some ideas that we've talked to them about, but we haven't come up with anything definitive yet. But it's their problem to solve. So I want to keep that in mind. I mean, they need to go out and get the experts and figure out what they need to do to resolve the issue.
How much do they figure, the engineers, how much do the engineers figure of runoff, soil and mud and?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to answer your question, depending on what you're looking at, but
Just wonder about yards or
you want to know how much you think has actually been moved at this
tons,
point?
yeah.
Yeah, that I don't know, but I do know this. When they put a coagulant on the clays, it causes them to stick together so they'll settle. They're trying to use those to help right now. There's what we call polyacrylamides that are out there, which is, I'm more of an expert in wastewater treatment. We use them in wastewater treatment as well to help particles that don't want to settle. You get them to stick together, they become bigger particles. You also take off their electrostatic charges, which is want to hold them in suspension, and they'll drop out. So they're trying that, and that's helping a little bit. But
Oh, like the same thing they did with gasoline or with oil spill and Gulf?
same thing, but when you're trying to get the oils to stick together, but this is a little different, because you're talking about basically a soil particle that's very small, so gravity doesn't want to pull it out against the viscosity of the water, and it's also got an electric charge that's trying to kind of hold it in suspension. And so these polymers, number one, they combat that charge, and number two, they cause those particles to stick together, become larger particles and settle out. But they're only reasonably effective in stormwater to a certain extent because of the amount of flow you're getting. You still need a stagnant pool for them to settle in, and you have to have good mixing. But I lost my train of thought on your original question, so. Oh, you were talking about the volume. So when they ran these through filter bags, and they got the coagulants to work so that it would stick, and then they pulled all the water out of it, the amount of clay that was left in there, very small, it's almost like dust. So what I'm saying is that if you squeeze all the water out, clay is really small, you don't have as much material as you would if you're talking about a sand or gravel. But it's still a problem. it's still a problem, so I don't want to downplay it. But the volume is relatively small compared to other soil materials. But to my knowledge, nobody's calculated that volume, and I don't even know how you go about doing that at this point. Yeah.
We've had 2 incidents already, and as I hear you speak today, it's ongoing and not yet totally corrected.
Yeah, they've done some things to make improvements, but whether or not those are going to be
Do we still have
sufficient,
materials flowing into our Great Lakes from this site?
we could. To my knowledge, we don't have any current.
Any fines being leveled against anybody associated with this fiasco?
By the department, not yet, but that's not off the table. But you gotta keep in mind, that's a long process. It's not like I go up there tomorrow and say,
Who initiates
here's
that?
your fine. From the DEQ's perspective, from a violation of Part 31 water quality standards, it would be initiated by my office, and I would start out with a violation notice, and then they would get an opportunity to respond to that notice, and then we can either negotiate a settlement, or we can, the next stage would be to refer it to our enforcement unit in Lansing, and then they can, again, at that point, we're still negotiating with the parties. If we have to go beyond that, then we'll make a reference to either a local prosecutor or the Attorney General's office.
If I understand correctly, that matter then is under consideration by you, and are you weighing that dependent upon total reaction by the contractor, developer?
I'm weighing that on a lot of things right now, but I'm definitely not taking that off the table. I'm going to continue to watch what happens with the site, and I'll be working with staff in Lansing and other staff in other districts to make sure that we're being consistent with other actions that we've taken in the state, and following our procedures and protocols for enforcement.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring this back to the board so you
Yep.
can publish. No, you're all right. Okay. So do you have another question?
You made a comment earlier, and I'm still confused on who's in the chain of all of this. The DEQ has a role and the county has a
The
role.
county has a role, and as local government.
Okay, but the county, you mentioned that you can kind of run on your own and make findings and issue.
And the county can do that too, and
Well, how do you, okay, that's my point. You've got 2 separate organizations, both involved.
it's not uncommon.
I realize that. In all of government, that's not uncommon. Only 2, probably more. Who of the 2, someone's got to be kind of the lead. Who's the-
Usually in most cases, we would be the lead agency, except when you're talking about soil erosion.
Well, in this case, the case we're talking about here, the event we're talking about here, is that the county has the lead and you support them, or you take the lead and they support you?
I haven't spoken to the county about anything that they plan on doing in terms of enforcement. I mean, there's a unique relationship with us and the county in that regard, that maybe I didn't make clear. State says, Part 91, the Soil Erosion and Sedimentation Control Act, is to be administered by a county enforcing agent. But the state of Michigan oversees and audits their programs, okay? So we do play a role, you know, have an oversight role with them. And so far, I mean, I know a lot of people are upset with the county, but they've done all the basic functions that would be expected of them. They required a permit and reviewed it, and generally have competent people on board. Believe me, I can show you counties where that's not the case. And they did respond to it. I mean, they didn't neglect the site. They can always debate as to whether they did the right thing fast enough, but they did respond to it, so.
I guess I feel if this was my problem, if I was a developer sitting on this thing, I'd want to have one source telling me what the expectation is, because they could be satisfying one, focusing on one, and then.
And that may be true. What I would probably expect would happen is that there would be some cross communication with us and them. We want to know what they're doing, but the state's not going to wait on the county and let the county make the decision in terms of whether or not we feel there's still an issue with Acme Creek from a water quality standpoint. So there could be a parallel action, and very often there should be coordination between us. But I would have to argue that where Part 91 is concerned, getting one voice from one level of government is not necessarily going to happen.
We're keeping it at the board right now. Amy?
There was a meeting yesterday that soil erosion was at NDEQ.
Yes.
Did you communicate with them?
I didn't have
Where
much
you guys-
opportunity to talk
Somebody
to
hit the
them,
switch back here,
but
please.
Justin's been working with them. He's been in the field with them on several occasions.
So there is coordination going on between the DEQ and soil erosion to come.
Keep in mind what I said originally. Generally, for an issue like this, they are actually the lead agency. We're more of the backstop. So if I make the play to move on the construction stormwater permit, that would generally be the next line of defense, so to
That's
speak.
pumping soil erosion.
Right, soil erosion should be the primary agency taking the lead role. They should be the, up
So
in front of
Justin
this.
has had communication with the soil erosion,
Yep.
Justin has been working with soil erosion to come up with.
You've walked that site too, haven't you, Justin, with
Yeah, I was
Pete?
there for 5
He's
hours.
probably walked that site
Many
enough to
times.
qualify as a marathoner
Yes, I
at this
bet.
point, so. And I'm in trouble because of all the clay I brought into the office off of it yesterday, so. Anyways,
Okay, Gene?
somebody else.
Well, I want to make sure that.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I look at this as 6 questions in my mind. Who owns this problem? What are the priority issues to resolve urgently? Who is the expert, the leader of the team? What is the action plan? What is the process, timing, and monitoring measurements? And how will this be communicated most effectively so we can recycle it? So in my head, we're on point 2 a little bit. What are the issues to resolve urgently? But also, who is the expert, the leader? Do you feel, Brian, that there's a cohesive team and an action plan here with knowledge and experts weighing in, and that things have been thought through, or?
On the surface, I would say that's probably true. I think that based on the meeting yesterday, there was a great degree of expertise at that table. But the challenges that this site represents are significant, given the technology that's available, given the state that we're in now on that site. So there's some significant hurdles to overcome to get that site to a point where I would be comfortable that it can handle the rainfall without having a discharge to the creek.
So you feel there's a team, is my question.
I do, but I can't speak to how effective they're going to be long-term,
That's okay.
or short-term, I should say. I'm more concerned with that. So the department, a lot of the questions you asked are really not questions that I can ask.
I understand that. This
Because
is
our
just my
role
thought.
in this, that's what I'm trying to clarify, is ultimately going to be, if there's a continued discharge, then we're going to issue a notice of violation, most likely.
Mhm.
And then I'll confer with the enforcement unit in Lansing and upper management, and decisions will be made as to whether we escalate or how we escalate, and what we negotiate with the owner. So ultimately, the department's going to hold the owner responsible. What comes out of that enforcement case is beyond our control, because it depends on what kind of settlement we can negotiate with them. And if they're not willing to negotiate, it'll depend on what we can win in court. So that's why people understand that the process isn't like I walk out with a piece of paper and say, fix it, or, here's a ticket. You don't, we actually do have a ticketing process that we can go through under another law, but we generally don't want to do that, because then that limits in other enforcement actions, and it's a very minimal amount. So I don't want to play that card, because, then that gets them off the hook for a few $100s. And
My focus is on urgent action, smart action, getting it fixed, getting it righted, and monitoring it consistently,
Right.
and going forward
And to
as
be
a
honest,
team and watching this.
The state's going to say there's nobody better to do that than locals who are here all the time, can tie into all the resources that the local government has. We're covering multiple counties, and so, and I've got responsibilities to those counties as well. So we would like to use local resources, local eyes and ears, local units of government, county enforcing agents.
Is somebody from the county here? I'm sorry.
I don't
Not
believe
see
tonight they are.
And why not?
That's,
They don't return my calls, so I haven't been able to get an update.
choice.
It's my personal belief, whether we have to face the fire or not, as agents of the state of Michigan, we're obligated to be here.
we do have Kevin, who used to be the soil erosion, is that the right term?
The current county drain commissioner, but I have nothing
He's
to
a
do
drain
with soil
commissioner.
erosion.
That's a trend.
There might be questions that are more germane to him, though, that I've heard
At times.
come up earlier, so.
One thing I'd like to say to the board, in a couple different documents we received, and this might be helpful too, people thought, or putting out, maybe we should have an independent person look at some of this. And Jeff and I and John and I actually talked about this a little bit today, and I'll hand out. That could be one of our decisions tonight out of this meeting. I'm not proposing at this point, I'm just saying that could be a decision. Let's get somebody that's not been involved at all to look at it, give us some advice, work with the people that are there, because no matter who looks at it, has to work with everybody. And
So
I,
does anybody have any more questions for me?
Yeah.
And I'll go sit back there.
well, before you do that, I want to make sure the board's got theirs out, and then we will.
Okay.
It's important the board can understand all the things they have. Board, did you have something else?
Yeah, I don't know who can answer this, but something that's been stated in different ways, and I'd just like to get someone's perspective of what happened. The first, we're calling it events, used to be rainfalls. The first event, there's two different stories, and all I know is what I read in the paper. Some said that there wasn't any runoff coming from the site, that the runoff was down below the site. That should be a simple, it was coming from the site on the first event on September 5th or not. Does anybody know?
The best answer I would have is that I believe we had a combination of both. There's no doubt in my mind after seeing the event on 9/21 that we did have some silt, like Ron's talking about this fine clay part, like talcum powder. So we're really talking about something very small. I'm sure that got in the bay. Anybody saw the bay, you'd have a hard time not saying it did.
On the
But-
5th.
On the 5th. But the silt fences themselves, remember, this stuff is so fine, it goes through the silt
You
fence.
could keep in mind, that silt fence, that was mentioned earlier, silt fence is not gonna stop in place. You keep, like, silt, I'll give you the kind of hierarchy of soils, you got gravel, sand, silt, and clays based on their size. So if you've got clay-sized particles,
One meeting.
the clay-sized particles are not gonna get stopped by silt fence.
So that's important. So I pretty sure would say, in my opinion, after looking at the second one, I'm sure that some of that very talcumy soil got through there. There was a couple of fences that were pushed over, but didn't have anything laying there like sand, gravel, and stuff like that.
Actually, there were some spots that I saw where the silt fence was actually doing its job.
Yep.
It had stopped the larger material, it had piled up on one side, it had forced it over, but there was no evidence that it had moved beyond that. But the clays are a totally different story.
And in the first occasion, that I remember from the county, they actually did ask for additional silt fence, straw bales to be put in and quite a bit. And that, Chris, would that be what you say from the first view?
I'm not ready to say what the county did or didn't do.
Okay, that's fair. But I believe they did put some of
Well,
it.
go back to your original question, based on the fact that we got complaints of other types of erosion occurring on that September 5th event in other places, it wouldn't surprise me if the source was not only the Myers site, but I would have a hard time believing that the Myers site was not at least a part
Okay,
of that.
I think that's a fair
Yeah.
answer.
But we had no
Answers that
eyes on
question
site on
between
that
some
day,
saying
so.
no erosion to mass
Right.
erosion, that was the whole story.
But based on what happened on subsequent events, I have a hard time believing that they weren't, that site wasn't contributing.
Anybody else on the board? Amy?
In your opinion, how's that?
Yeah. For what it's worth.
We're
Well,
sorry to
could
be
you
grilling
tell
you,
that
but we appreciate it.
You've clearly seen similar situations, maybe not exact, but similar. What's the length of time here to get something like this resolved? Are we looking at a 2-week, 6 months? I mean,
I'm not
obviously,
really privy to what the details that the contractor, I mean, ultimately, the main thing that will affect the control of this site is getting the clay exposed areas covered.
so whether snow comes
Right,
first,
well,
freezes.
so if you continue to get rain, you're gonna have a problem. Until you get grass, pavement, or blankets, or something on that site, that is gonna, those clays, they're gonna mobilize and they're gonna move into the creek. And so until you get that site covered with something that intercepts that water
Sure.
from, then you're not gonna really get it resolved. I mean, the downstream controls are only gonna have a minimal effect on that.
And the blankets, can those be immediate? Because are those
Well,
just
they-
the straw blankets?
No,
They've
these-
already applied some of
They
them.
put a lot of blankets in.
Okay, I'm like, they've already
It's
applied
a
some of
big
those.
site.
And you can expect
I mean,
those, correct?
that's something that the developer can choose to do based on the direction and things that he gets on the contractor from all the other players. But the department, like I said, we're not gonna tell them what the solution is.
I
But
understand.
it's theoretically, they could cover the whole site in tarps, and that would resolve the problem. So, or at least most of it.
And I think that's why we go back to Dr.
The
Grove's.
water will still run off, but the clay won't be with it. That's the difference.
Also getting topsoil and planting and seeds in there was very key to that issue.
But that's a problem this time of year, depending on the weather, and that's where my concern is getting that stabilized in this late in the fall. If Sometimes this late in fall is the best time to grow grass, if you have the right fall weather. Right now, it's a concern. And then it'll be an issue again next spring.
Another point of clarification, we clarified that, we did get some runoff, but we can't attribute everything that happens to that site, it probably wasn't huge, so that puts that to rest. The second one that's really confusing, Brian brought it up, and you had heard in the record ago, and that goes back to Dr. Grobel's visit in July. And the implication is, not the implication, the way it's stated is, he visited the site, saw some actions that need to be taken, documented them, acting on our behalf,
Right.
passed those off to the developer, to Elmer's, whoever, and the implication is that they ignored it. I mean, that's what this quote's word said. However, we saw a document where the developer, or Elmer's, or someone responded and said, I received this, your letter on the 14th, I believe. We did this on the 15th, we did this on the 16th, we did all of these things, showed pictures back, before, after, with the exception of some things. So, can we get some clarification to the public? 'Cause I've heard this all over the place. Everyone is totally did not respond to a letter response. So can you, for the record, tell us?
Absolutely, and Brian, I would be happy to take my own question.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'll stay over here in case you want to bring me back.
Okay, I think it's really important to be very clear and extremely honest in this process.
Absolutely.
I have been frustrated to the nth degree with this whole situation, on a whole bunch of levels. So let me start somewhere, which is with your question, and then hopefully we can clear up some stuff. But yeah, there were comments made and documented. I haven't been really working on this in some kind of a fashion where I was to run out there periodically. I was called by John Equangeli to go visit the site. I went and visited the site. I wrote up my comments on what I saw. I really haven't been involved in this process since the approval of the site plan and the special use permit. So a couple things came immediately. One, silt fences, there were problems. The overall system was not designed in such a way that I thought it was going to work. But let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees. My comments about silt fences are nothing compared to the point that was made that the site had to be stabilized. Meaning grass, meaning cover. Temporary, permanent, and as I told the developers a couple days ago, I don't care how much money you spend on it if you have to go back and dig it up later. Stabilize the site. The site is clay covered, and we're going to have problems. They're going to continue. It's going to continue in the spring, in my opinion. There are no silt fences in the world that are going to stop it. The basins that were built were not the basins that were approved or designed by this township.
Real.
We have a long, long, long public process to get to a resolution of a site plan permit and a review and approval and SUP permit. The contractor says that I approved somehow verbally a change in design, which I did not do. And instead of constructed wetlands, they were building retention basins. There's a combination of things here. The primary issues are the first thing I want to start with, which are one, the site needed to be stabilized, it was not. Two, the basins were not anywhere near what was approved, and we would have had clay leave either design with that storm event, with the site being open. The site was open. So, the question is always, well, who's to blame? I think there's plenty of blame to go around here. I think that on many levels, many agencies and certainly the landowners and developers have failed. We went through an entirely public and important, I think that the process is key to make sure that this didn't happen, and it did. It happened twice. So, what's happened since is very positive. Number one, the basins are going to be built according to what we approved in the first place. That was agreed to yesterday. I was very happy to hear that. My perforated ulcer did not surface. I thought we were gonna have a huge fight about that, but we didn't. It's been agreed that what was approved will be indeed built. It was also agreed that maximally they're gonna cover this site. They're gonna grass everything possible, they're gonna tell us what's going on. I'm gonna go out there regularly, every week. I'm teaching 2 days a week downstate, but I will be there every week, once or twice a week. They're gonna monitor the creek once a week, based on my recommendations of what to sample for, so that we have a record of what, the future holds. I'm also going to recommend that they go back and repeat the biological studies to see what the damage was. There was damage. Let's not, pretend. This was very significant. If you're going to enforce, this is what you enforce on. I mean, what's the point of all these rules and regulations if nobody enforces? I asked the state directly, are you going to enforce? No. You're going to enforce the next time, if it happens. I asked the county, are you going to enforce? We're not sure. I recommended to the township that they enforce. Everybody wants to do the right thing. My opinion is far more strident than most, but I believe it's true. And that is that if, why pass it if you're not going to enforce? I'll be almost done in a second here. I think that the timing and the phasing of the project, the township required that the whole property be balanced, be opened in the first phase. That was a mistake. I would recommend that you not do that in the future. Don't require all the roads, everything be built in the beginning. Do it phase by phase by phase, so this doesn't happen again. Everybody knew this was a clay site. We fought, I argued with Gordy Frazier, do some borings. No, we're not going to do borings. They finally did them. Finally, after 6 months of argument, oh, it's a clay site. It won't infiltrate. So we had to change our stormwater plan. It was no mystery that this was going to be an extremely delicate site for development, and that the stormwater system isn't just approvable, it had to be exemplary, or we were going to have a problem, and we had the problem. I have built wetlands. We have had 4 100-year events in the last decade. That's not a mystery either. So, 2 things to keep in mind about that. 1, what are best management practices? Is it the manual or is it common sense? 2, do we build to the county ordinance, which is a 25-year storm event, or do we do something better? If you read the documents Virginia Teagle mentioned, and early on, we started here saying we wanted a 100-year storm event back to back. Don't let anything leave the site. That was compromised away through the planning process, was just normal. Come to something more reasonable. At the same time, this is what you get. So don't forget that. I think that we're on the right track. I personally apologize for what's happened. It should not have happened. It should not have happened. We did everything we could to prevent this from happening, and it did, twice. There was an interim period there that actions should have occurred that did not occur. So it didn't happen twice. It should have happened once. It happened twice. That's unacceptable. I think the economic impacts, if you don't care about the environment or fish, fine. But the economic impacts are huge on something like this, and it puts really a black eye, I think, on everybody. And we should learn from this and never go back to this kind of thing again. If you can't sleep at night, or just that kind of person, where you want to go back and read all the record, it's all in there. It was all said. It was all discussed. It was all supposed to be prevented, and it happened. So let's not do that again.
I guess a follow-up, but nothing you said surprises me. I mean, this project went on over a 10-year period, and things changed, and views, and go on and on. But I guess my take on this whole thing, I think you said we could focus on remediating the situation, get everybody's head focused on getting it fixed, and if there's any discussion about fines or penalties or any of that stuff, if you throw that in the mix now, people become defensive and finger pointing will take place. So I hope the meeting, I wasn't at the meeting that Jay had, the DEQ and the county and Elmer's and the developer and a litany of people, that they know that's the focus. Get it fixed, and after the fact, we can always come back, and if there was issues and someone is interested in finding somebody or that, do that later. I guess my only other comment is, I did read through this report, and this was created at the board's, or the township's request to our planner. I certainly, after reading it, glancing through it again, didn't come away with a sense of urgency that you're now stating about how dangerous the site was and the potential for what has happened. Now, it was silt fences. Now, maybe, not being an engineer, maybe there's some very subtle things, but we never got a follow-up saying, Armageddon is upon us. And I'm a little disappointed in that it wasn't, the flag didn't raise up a little higher.
Oh, okay. If this is my responsibility, I guess, then I will take it. But
Our
it's not my
planner's
responsibility.
responsibility.
It certainly is not my responsibility. And yes, if you read it, that's how we write. And we say when things need to be done, they need to be done. We don't put it in the memo if it's, editorial. And did I know that there was a 100-year storm event coming? No. Was I told to wait a week before I inspected the site? Yes. And I'm not going to take the blame, if that's what you're trying to do. No. For not saying there's going to be a catastrophe, but there certainly was. And there are 3 layers that are supposed to prevent that, and they all failed.
Well, I guess maybe I would say going forward, if you're going to be inspecting the site on a weekly basis at our expense, I would hope you would, because we're not engineers. We can read this, and I know it's silt fences, but we do probably need a little editorial comment that if you have real concerns.
Well, that was not written for the board. It was written to be sent to the developer who knew exactly what to do with it. If I was going to present to you or write a letter to you, I would have written a letter to you. I was not asked to do that.
John, somebody should have, not that we could have prevented anything changed, but just.
No, but I think that's where we're gonna go. Out of this meeting, we're gonna have it laid out. Who's responsible, who's coordinating, reports coming back, we're gonna post it on the website. That's what I'm hoping we're gonna get to. So that it's not, he said, she said, somebody else.
There's no opinion involved here. It's been observed, it happened, it's fact. So it needs to be fixed, and they're working aggressively to fix it. I can't certify the fix. I think this is a really challenging site, as Brian said.
I agree.
And Brian was very forceful in the meeting yesterday, as was the county, as to what happens next if there's a problem.
Was there any pushback at the meeting yesterday from the developer, Elmer's? I mean, you spoke bluntly.
Gordy Frazier was defensive. There was no pushback from anybody. Steve Schooler said they would do everything we asked.
Okay.
It was not about shading anything. It was about knowing what the list was.
Great.
But, I had to sit through 10, 20 minutes of defensive stuff about how I had approved a change in the plan, which I hadn't approved. And, it's just not appropriate. I will stand up for the public process. You can say that I made a mistake, that's fine, but I will stand up for that public process, and to just build what you want to build instead of what we approved is entirely unacceptable.
Excuse me, can I weigh in on that point for the board? Recently, Ken Pedersen, attorney at VGT.
I didn't catch your name, sir.
Ken Pedersen, Petterson, attorney for developer VGT, right there on the side. It is certain there were 2 100-year rains, that we all agree, and that caused a certain amount of clay particles, or whatever you want to call them, along with other particles from other places to end up in the creek and ultimately the bay. That was immediately addressed. After the 5th and after the 21st, there was involvement of the DEQ at the state level, there was involvement of the DEQ at the county level, and steps were taken to address the runoff. Certainly, it's probably not a big surprise, given the amount of rain and the amount of dirt that was up on that hill that caused the runoff. We're not talking about an event of pollution, we're not talking about a disaster as it's been termed. It's not something anyone wanted or expected to happen, but when we talk about what's going on up there, the developer has in all cases complied and attempted to remedy any problem that has come up. Mr. Grobel just identified that they were willing to do anything that it took. There are gentlemen from Elmer's here that can address what's been done out there at the site. And we have the owner of the design firm, Gordy Frazier, is here, can talk about the process. We're not talking about a bad design. We're talking about an approved design. Whether Mr. Grobel was involved in it or not isn't the issue. Frankly, there is an approval through Beckett and Rader of the design and system that is being constructed out there. Some of the initial concepts were laid forth by Dr. Grobel when we went through this process, but everything that's being done is in conformance with the SUP. Now, are we willing to take a look at what might improve and be helpful and address everyone's concerns? Certainly, we have been. Over 12 years we have been. But to say that something was not designed or not approved or done differently than approved is not accurate. It's
It needed to
incorrect.
come back to the planning commission.
It came to the board as directed under the SUP, and approval was granted. The approval from Beckett and Rader, the consultant of the township, sent a letter to Sharon.
Yeah, don't release those.
And video.
So yeah, the disaster, I agree, it wasn't I don't know how to term disaster, so it's all relative in everybody's mind. The best way I can describe it is it was coffee. You run coffee through a filter, the grounds stay in the filter, and the coffee comes through, and it's black. If you dump black in clear water, you're gonna have black water. Or in this term, I like cream in my coffee, so we got cream coffee water. We're trying to figure out how to get the cream coffee water out of it. Since then, we've been blessed with some nice weather. Could we have built the ponds first? Yeah, there was design issues. I'm not familiar with all those. It was approved, that's all I know. We're lucky enough to be the contractor to design, to help build the job, so somebody's gonna build it. So I would just soon have a local guy build it as to somebody else doing it, because I know when that guy's gonna care about the community. I know that's hard to say when you go take all the pictures and you look at all of the disasters. So we've had in excess of, Steve probably can tell you tomorrow, but 30, 40 guys working on it the last 2 weeks. We've gotten a lot of the west end of the site restored with mulch blanket. Both ponds are constructed and finished now. There is some issues, as Brian mentioned, from the DEQ, for as far as it's not all restored, and the rain's killing us to try and get it restored. So, but we are working very hard to get that done. Walked around, I got my steps today too, so 10,000 steps with all kinds of clay boots and stuff. So they were heavy steps because of the clay. Just kind of, I was 8 foot tall before I got done. I saw Brian walking around out there today and volunteered to go with the DEQ and to walk around the site and visit it. There's safety issues, and the developer, I don't want to put words in his mouth, I just wanted to come and say, you know, with it being heated, it was kind of a touchy deal. It's been a hot topic from day one, that site. So they weren't trying to stick their head in the sand, and that's, I came out here on my own to probably stick my head way out on a chopping block, and so probably gonna get cut off. But I just wanted to let you guys know that we're busting our ass out there to try and keep the creek clean. If there's some issues today with the rain event we had, well, the site was intact, so there wasn't, Justin, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we are keeping it from getting into the creek. So we've done a lot of things out there to try and prevent that.
My understanding, Justin, you did not observe a discharge today.
There was not a discharge
Right.
at the creek.
But there's more rain coming.
Correct. Tomorrow's gonna be an interesting day. I think the weather forecast says, I don't wanna say a deluge, but that's a technical term
Justin,
for a lot.
no discharge or no sediment?
No sediment going to the creek.
There was discharge.
There was water going, but there
Oh,
was
okay.
no, there was clean water that was getting in.
Thank you.
Did you see it?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question?
Not like the last event.
The clean's relative.
Please, one conversation.
Relatively clean.
Rochelle?
Yeah, you were saying that there were some design issues with those.
I don't know about any design issues, I'm just listening to what you guys are listening to tonight.
You said there were some design issues.
Design issues, but I'm sorry, my wife says I gotta choose my words too. What?
You saw no design issues?
I'm an engineer. The plan was approved, we're building what land was there. I guess I don't know if they want to answer those questions or not.
That might be helpful.
So we're constructing what's on the plan and building it for the plan. We're meeting with all the regulatory agencies to make sure that they're happy and that we're complying with everything we're supposed to do. So we're working hard to do that. So 2 rain events, and obviously that's why we're all here. So we're trying to prevent that from happening again.
Sorry, we have a question.
How often, you said you meet with all the regulatory departments. How often do they come in? Like, how often does soil erosion come up and say, okay, we've got to look just to make sure?
Every rain event, you have to inspect the site.
So they have to come up. Soil erosion
There
comes
is
up.
a stormwater operator that inspects the site. And then after these last rain events, everybody's out there to the house.
Sure, but actual county, no, it's the county, or is it the engineer that actually does that? Who actually does that inspection?
The engineer is the stormwater operator.
Okay.
He does the inspection.
He does the inspection.
And then the county's been out there also since.
Pete Brewski's been out there 6 or 7 times in the last 10 days.
Okay.
And before that, he was making every bi-weekly checks on everything.
Prior to.
Is there documentation of that effect?
Yes.
This,
Yeah,
this,
it's
the
all
stormwater documentation's right here. This is the stormwater operator. Anybody?
Can I look at it while we're talking?
Uh,
I promise I'll give it back.
Wait.
You know, if I'm looking at that, then I'm less apt to interrupt. So.
If you want a copy later, you can.
Thank you.
It's public information. We have no, it's done by the stormwater operator. It is a Gordy Fraser employee, but that's their function and their job. All those are kept on site. Steve Folkelson, are you there?
Yeah.
See if I heard you. Aren't they kept on site in your construction trailers?
Yes.
So they are there. And
Yes.
I've seen them, and that's why we got the copies. By the way, it's important we understand all the, this is, as said before, a big issue. There's a lot of things about it. I think the goal we all have and want to have is to prevent it. I think everybody is behind it. Nobody in our meetings yesterday say we're not going to do anything. In meetings, you often have confronting conversations. It's good conversations because we all learn about pieces and all. But in the end, everybody said, let's get at what we can do. They were already doing stuff, but whatever else we need to do, and that's important. So, Joe, do you want to speak tonight also?
Yeah, just real briefly.
Anything else for Troy? Troy, thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Didn't know you were going to be here, but we always appreciate that. Thank you.
Evening, I'm Joe Elliott, I'm with Gordy Fraser Associates. I was a design engineer for many years, did a lot of stormwater design. I'm a conservation district, lived in Traverse City all my life. Like to fish, like to swim in the bay. It's like Troy said, we're just like you folks. We really respect that resource that we have. So this is a serious issue. I got to commend Troy and his guys. I was out there walking the site today for a couple hours in the rain. Didn't see you, Justin, but we must have been on different ends. It's a big site. They're throwing a lot of bodies at it out there, and they were really going at it while they're working in the rain and really doing a lot to control what everybody's concerned about. So, I mean, if you see those guys from Elmer's, they did an admirable job today doing that. As far as the design's concerned, when we design a site, we're required to meet certain requirements through the county drain code. We designed it for the county drain code. In this case,
That's wrong. There's no drain code involved here.
well, the ordinance, local ordinance.
The soil erosion ordinance.
Yeah, local ordinance. So we designed it to the local ordinance, and we have to get a permit for that. In this case, it was a very sensitive site, so we not only did the design and ran the calculations, but the township required us to send those on through Beckett and Rader, and Chris, I think, was involved in varying degrees through the process, to get their approval of those too. We sent them to them in September. We have a letter from September of last year from Beckett and Rader that approved our stormwater calculations and our design. So we have that in the file. That was approved, and that's what the project is being built to currently. So as far as not meeting those design plans, that's not the truth. We are meeting those design plans as submitted to the township and approved by the county at that time. The issue right now is soil erosion. It's not drainage, it's not volumes. How stormwater systems work is, especially on that site, it's a clay site. We design basins to hold the water, the runoff, when you have the big events, to keep it from getting into the resource. So we have the big ponds built out there. It's a clay site, so it doesn't infiltrate the water. So we have slow releases from the basin that just let a little bit out at a time. So once the storm event's over, the level goes back down, it's ready to accept the next storm event. That's where a lot of the clay particles are getting out, some of the slow releases. Some of it's just coming off raw land right now. Troy and the guys and Steve and his crews have been out there trying to stabilize a lot of that. I agree with Chris and Brian, that site needs to get covered up. That's a big part of the solution right now. The weather's been hammering those guys. Last week was a pretty good week. They got a lot of work done. Hopefully we'll get a spell like that, but they're gonna, from what I saw today, they're putting a lot of men on that. And we're gonna continue to address the problem. We're gonna be on it until it's fixed, so I'll give you that. Yes, sir.
In your opinion, what was the primary cause of failure? And if the grass had not been removed at this time, would it have still failed?
Well, certainly open up the site had something to do with that. And so the more stable ground you would have maintained, it probably would have been better. But due to the size of the earth movement on the site and the fact that they wanted to get the whole site graded, that was part of the township requirement. It required us to open up more land, as Chris had said too. So, you know, it's, yeah, in answer to your question, the more stable ground, the more grass you have, the less runoff you get, especially the clay.
So what was the primary cause of the failure?
The primary cause, well, the amount of rain was one thing, the fact that there was exposed soil on the site. And there was a couple areas that I think where some of the runoff was directed towards the wetlands, where it got past some of the silt fence, some of the fine clays got past there. So.
What would you change?
You know, I guess in hindsight, you know, put up more silt fence. If the cloudy water's still going to get through there, might want to maybe do some more extensive seeding. Try to get on the seeding early. That's a tough thing.
Would you recommend phase removal of grasslands?
Pardon?
Would you recommend phase removal of grasslands?
It was tough on that site because it's a dirt balancing thing. When you start moving the dirt around, you got to cut the dirt out of here and move it to there. So you start disturbing a fair amount of land to get the whole site graded as was the requirement of the PED. So on a site you can phase, it's great. It's better probably for stormwater. Maybe not for dirt balancing, and maybe not for what the township wanted to accomplish with the PED. I'm not sure. So.
Thank you.
We talked about briefly, maybe Brian will chime in here, polyacrylamides on the site, on a clay site, are very beneficial on this site. I'm surprised they weren't promoted in the beginning, but nonetheless, I believe there would be a good safety net now to button up the site.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear, I know Brian says they don't design them, but if the engineer and the developer wants to use them, you're going to
They needed to get an approval from our staff in Lansing, and they turned that around within a day of that request.
That's why I want to ask, because some polyacrylamides are
they have to be
nuisance
reviewed
to the aquatic species. They're toxic.
There's certain types with certain charges that have a toxicity issue. So our aquatic toxicity specialist has a permit process for reviewing those. And I got a call one day, I think, from somebody saying they were looking to put those in, and they needed approval, and he turned it around relatively quickly. I think it was the very next day. So, but that type they're using, and again, I can't remember which charge it is. That one type is toxic, the other type isn't. They're obviously using the type that isn't.
Negative charge.
Yeah.
So, but there are some flocculants that you can put into the stream as well too to get that clay particles to settle and stop covering up the gravel bottom of Acme Creek. So.
Yeah. I think how we're trying to approach this now is try to get the site covered as quickly as possible, so we're not bringing that clay from the upstream side, the clay water, and then start working on maybe settling some of it out within ponds. We'll try to cut it off at the source first, I think, is our approach. They do seem to be working. I was out there today, and on the upper end of those channels where they have those, as you go downstream, that water starts to clear, especially with some of the other measures.
That would be consistent with what Chris and I have said all along too, is that the source of the bare open ground that's 99% of the problem right now.
I would agree.
Yeah, you gotta get that covered.
Yes, ma'am.
I heard people talking about seeding, but the topsoil or the sand is gone, and it's clay, and anybody who's ever tried to plant a garden or anything in clay knows that grass won't grow in clay. Plus, now we have all this rain, which will wash the seeds away. So instead of seeding, and I happen to know somebody who's built roads for a long time, and they always say that it starts raining August 14th, I think. So there's a lot of rain. And so how are you going to seed? Because we're beyond I think we're beyond the best time to seed. So what is your plan for covering this up?
I'd have to, I think we have Steve talk to that, but they do have a large topsoil
We
pile.
probably have 70% of it seeded currently.
Okay.
And I would guess 90% of it's topsoil. It's just too mushy. So before the last rain event, we had an area all ready to be seeded. They were seeded that Monday, and then we got the rain event before that, so. And
So last
unfortunately,
week
you need to
helped.
wait. I'm sorry?
Last week helped. With
Yes.
the
Oh,
sun.
absolutely,
Yeah.
Well, we were ready, and then we had to redo all that and redo it. So the areas that are open are basically gonna be road that are left, and unfortunately, we need to get the utilities in that area. So we've been trying to restore as much as we can, other than what we need to disturb again in the road area. And we are still trying to figure out how to remove the coffee from the water. We've tried some, storm clear, which is, they talk about coagulants.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
try and make
about
it, and somebody else asked, how much can you specify, how much went off the site? We have filter bags that are, quarter the size of this room, that you run through this coagulant into this filter bag to catch the sediment, and then it's clear coming out. Well, when they get all done, this bag blows up to the point where it won't let any more through it. When you get done, the guys can pick it up by hand. I mean, usually.
I mentioned that earlier, it's basically a dusting on the inside.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, so I'm not trying to dismiss it, because we are working very hard to keep it out of the stream, okay? But we're still trying to figure that out. So I don't want to say we got it solved, but we have made a lot of steps to prevent what happened last time. So.
Thank you.
Is any of the ground perk at all? Well, for retention basin purposes, or?
The underlying soils are very impermeable.
Yeah, that's what I thought so.
Yep, so that's why we have slow releases in our basins, is because they won't naturally infiltrate into the soil.
So there's no real permeable soil.
No, I
on the
know
ground.
we've done borings as deep as 40 feet, I think, in spots out there, and it's just clay.
There's just clay. Oh, okay. Yeah, the subsurfaces are always a big mystery. So.
John, we're gonna bring it back to board. I think we want to. Thank you. Appreciate everybody's comments. It's good we understand as much as we can. We had some talks tonight, and Amy mentioned earlier some action. One thing I would like to propose to the board is we do this JF New is a company that we could hire independently as a consultant to help us look at this site, look at the design, work with everybody. Everybody's willing to work together. It's not they're not, and that's that would be a one proposal we could do to help us move forward to make sure we have everything appropriate. There's no question about what it is. Dorian?
I'm always concerned when you have a problem adding more folks into it. In my experience, you're probably go further ahead and pull people off the project. So I don't know anything about these folks, and I'm hesitant. I'd be hesitant to say yes, throw another body. And along the line, just kind of, if I may, again, just trying to sort out, this project's run for a long period of time. I wasn't here during a lot of the process, but in some ways, some conclusions. Or something I'd like to just summarize what I think was said. The developer spoke and said it was built to the SUP. I guess I'd like to just get that on the table so we can get it clarified here. People may not have agreed with the SUP, thought it wasn't insufficient in terms of the requirements. Is the project being built in accordance with the terms of the SUP, which is a 1,100-page document, generally speaking? Who can answer that question?
I guess I would like to answer in part, at least as to the discussion that Mr. Pedersen raised. and the approval of the stormwater system. I'm not going to get in back and forth with you today, Ken. We can do that later. But I want to, and I'm sure we will, Aaron. But I want to set for the record that I've looked at the documents that were reviewed and approved, and I've looked at the way this moved forward. I've looked at what the site plan approval was, which was the stormwater system that Dr. Grobel had a big part in, that was created at least conceptually by a company called King and McGregor. That approval was incorporated into the 1,100-page site plan approval. I think maybe you're being handed the general site plan approval, but the documents that they produced, the drawings that Gordy Frazier produced, both indicated the step-down wetland system. At some point during the process in the summer and fall of 2012, someone changed that. But, and there is a review by Beckett and Rader showing, it says, I just had it up in front of me, now I won't be able to find it. No, there it is right there. Our office has reviewed the stormwater plans dated September 5th, 2012, and received in our office September 6th, 2012. It is recommended that stormwater systems be approved for construction. Person who reviewed that plan, as I understand it, was not reviewing the pond system, was reviewing the numbers coming off, all of the impervious surface, the piping, the flows, and that sort of thing. That's what I understand. Regardless of that approval, though, this is a significant change to the site plan as approved. A significant change to a site plan requires a site plan amendment. We've done 4 of those so far, I think 3 or 4 of those site plan amendments. It's not a secret process, it's a public process. It comes at a request from the applicant. It didn't come. This system is inconsistent, as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't meet the requirements. Now, I heard something different tonight than what I heard yesterday with Steve Fuller. I think Chris and Jay and Brian and everyone else who was here would agree with me. Yesterday I heard they are going to work with Grobel, Beckett and Rader, King and McGregor, and Gordy Frazier to redesign this system to meet those requirements. That's what I heard yesterday. That's what I'm relying on and I'm expecting to happen. If it doesn't happen, then something else has to happen from the township. But until that process, this is the first time tonight that I've heard that it's not going to happen or maybe won't happen. Until that process breaks down, we'll move forward with assuming that it's going to go forward. If you were to hire JF New would be stepping in to do part of that process, probably relieving the majority of the Beckett and Rader review. Grobel would still probably be the partial reviewer of it, but it would remove the Beckett and Rader engineers from that process because it would be someone independent and new. So I'm not suggesting whether you do or don't, that's your decision. What I'm saying is I wanted to make sure the record was clear as to that issue. I'm no engineer, I'm no scientist, I don't have any opinion as to whether these basins that I'm looking at my computer, so I'm pointing at it. These basins that were created that are almost complete or very nearly complete are or aren't sufficient to handle and manage stormwater on the site. That question is different than whether it's best practices, a sound wetland step-down system that was designed. Those are 2 separate questions as far as I'm concerned. But I'm no scientist to say whether this is sufficient to handle the wetland or the water or stormwater on the site or not. I don't know. But what I do know is it doesn't meet the requirements of the site.
So I don't want to get, I would prefer the 2 attorneys don't get into
We're not going to, and I won't be engaging with them on that tonight.
But I guess the question is, just to get it out in public, and it really is whether they built, I mean, we are where we are, whether they built it to the SUP or not, and they have documents and we have documents. So I guess the question is, you thought that they were going to change the plan to make it a more robust system? That was what you said when you came away from yesterday's meeting?
No, I thought they were going to redesign their stormwater system to meet the requirements of this site plan. That's what I said. Not to change it and make it more robust, but to meet the requirements of the site plan.
Well, okay, assuming that the reason it's more robust. I mean,
yeah, it's a different system, I said, yeah.
So I guess
I think we
Is that
had,
the fact?
yes, that was a
That was
commitment
what we were
from Gordy
communicating
Frazier, from the
and Steve's
BGT,
board,
all the
but-
people yesterday. Joe, is that, was you?
The way I understand it, it's, the original SUP had like three, for lack of a better term, kind of kidney bean shaped basins, and had some wetlands in those. That got changed during the process, and when we did the final submittal, that Beck and Rayner reviewed, they approved our design.
No, Mike,
I don't
really
get-
question
We're
is
not gonna get an
that.
argument
I
on
know
that
that.
anymore.
But-
I've already given you my
I'm just
opinion
getting
on
to
that.
the next one.
Okay.
So yesterday when they met, I know Chris had some discussion with Terry and Steve, I think, and talked about how could they accomplish the function of that system in the configuration, by modifying the configuration we have now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, because I wasn't there, so this is what I heard secondhand. So we're gonna make some modifications to try to replicate the functionality of what you didn't get that was in the SUP. And utilizing the existing system, because a lot of parts of the system address the volume and other things. I think there were reasons we didn't configure it like it was. There were some concerns from King and McGregor at the time about that those drying up, getting blown out because they were right at the end of the pipeline. I think that got discussed during the whole process. I don't know about the documentation on that. I wasn't privy to that, so.
Well,
so-
just to answer that, you know, and we can play telephone and
Sure.
third hand, fourth hand. It was discussed that they would be redesigned by Corey Fraser Associates to the SUP approval. That design hasn't arrived. So can I vouch for it? No. Can I tell you that's what they committed to? Yes. And the concept was going back to the original approval concept. It was never an issue that they wouldn't be wet enough, just the opposite. The issue was, what do we do with all the salt and sand and stuff from the parking lots? And then we went round and round about pollution prevention. We still don't have a pollution prevention plan that I've seen. All of which was listed, there were like 9 conditions for approval. That SUP approval hasn't gone anywhere, it's still in effect. So I think we go back to that and you can get your bullet list of what needs to be in that new plan. But there was a specific statement, and I recorded it, that there would be a new stormwater plan submitted.
From yesterday?
Yep.
Okay, all right, well, that's what was said, that's what would take place. I would get back with Terry and Steve and all those that were present at that time.
Yep.
And Jeff stated there was a commitment yesterday
Yeah.
to do that, and I stated earlier, the team to do it would be Gordy Frazier, BGT, King and McGregor, Global Environmental, and Beckett Raider. That was what I said in my opening statement.
Yesterday.
Right?
Oh. May I ask a question, Mr. Zollinger?
Yes.
So would that be a significant change that would require review and re-permitting from the county, and that open process has been discussed? Is this just an internal decision that?
Well, let me answer that, because consistency with the site plan doesn't require a site plan amendment. It doesn't require the planning commission to review and approve, because it's being designed consistent with what the planning commission and the township board approved in 2012. So that doesn't. It requires, as the site plan was approved, final engineering approval from the
Our consultant.
consultants, yes.
But the relevant issue was brought up, and Brian spoke to it yesterday, was that what was built out there wasn't consistent with the DEQ permit either. There is a DEQ permit for stormwater disposition.
Well, I want to correct one thing there. I don't necessarily agree with that statement, Chris.
You don't?
Because if you're talking about the 303 permit, I personally don't know what's in that permit. So I couldn't say whether it was or wasn't.
It
built
includes
consistent.
fill and disposition, that was.
I'm going to have staff look into it, but I wouldn't say that it's not right now because I don't know.
Well, it shows, if you look at the permit, it's public record, it shows a 3-tiered original concept.
Right.
So there's that issue out there to answer your question more completely.
Thank you.
Hi, Jay.
I'm sorry.
Hi. Just because now you learn from one teacher and you don't learn anything, then you go to the next teacher and teaches the same thing and you get it. Well, just so I understand, there's so many laws at state and local level that govern this sort of thing. And so the salient point is that there's a site development going on, and there are laws at the state and local level to protect the site runoff into a cold designated trout stream. And so the developer comes to the township with their engineers, and the engineers make this proposal on this site development to prevent the runoff into the creek, thus into the bay. So we don't have this type of disaster, if you want to call it that, that's what I call it. And so the engineers and developers bring it to the township, and the township is really, they're not qualified to make decisions with the engineers, and they trust the engineers and their consultants to make the decisions and help them make the decisions to prevent this type of thing from happening. Thus it's happened. The township approved their permits, trusting them that this would not happen. They trusted in that their engineering would make sure that this sort of thing did not happen. But yet it did. Maybe the permits that they approved were complied with. But yet, what really happened? Their engineering didn't work. So, who's at fault? The engineers, the developers, the board. They weren't qualified to make the decision on whether this was engineered properly. So, where does the fault lie? With the people that oversee the permits, the people who make the decision on granting the permits, the engineers that designed it? Where does it all fall into place?
Well, that's what we're trying to talk about. I appreciate your comment on that. I think we have commitment from what was said, from everybody to do what needs to be done to design.
You know, back at Raider, everything went through Sharon. If Sharon didn't get it to Mr. Grobel, that's not my fault, that's not Gordy Frazier's fault, that's nobody's fault. The stuff's built. The reason for most of the problem isn't just the seeding. The second pond wasn't done. It was going out of there. The second pond was not done. It wasn't done during either one of those events.
Brian, please don't break in, Brian. Thank you. Okay, back to the board. I think we need to set some actions, whatever that is.
One of the, I guess what the board would like is something, a one-page document for every board meeting, or if something is critical beforehand, something gets passed for the board, like on the progress of buttoning up the site, regardless of what technology you're using for drainage or whatever. It's a modified, taking the existing plan, which they think is valid in the SUP, and modifying it or whatever. I don't think we're going to settle that debate in the short term. And we can't slow the process down of fixing it to get the lawyers saying, John and I approve something, whatever. So I think we need to go ahead with where we are. We need an update from somebody at the site, Willie Frazier or somebody, in kind of in a summary format of what's going on. Are we in good shape? Are we making progress? Does it look good? And there's an update in that form of fashion.
That was part of what I read tonight from them. But we've been getting those now. If there is any changes every day, if we're looking for something more, we need
Well,
to.
something's, I'm getting the raw data, and I'm not an engineer.
Okay.
And I look at these violation things, and I don't know what's a serious violation versus a minor violation. So,
Okay.
and I don't know if that's Chris, if he's out there, or Gordon Frazier, or Elmer's. Give us something we can understand on progress.
All the input and all the discussion has been very good. I'm sorry, I'm going back to my point 3 now. Who is the expert? Who is the leader? When you have the people, Brian, Troy, Chris, Joe, do people feel there's a cohesive team to help our developers face forward and get this fixed? And then, because I'm thinking, the communication's wonderful, but I want to know, is there a team? Is there a leader? Who's the leader? Is there an action plan? Or maybe will there be? By what time? When is that? What's the process, timing? How's it going to be monitored? And then those are things as a layperson that I can see and will feel good about. And I think that will help our
developer too. So face forward, you know, I think the communication is great, but who's the ringleader? Who's the leader and what's the action plan? And, or when is it coming?
The guy doing the work and who's gonna do it. It's got to come from them.
I agree.
Right.
Sure, and I don't know, is the coordination, I mean, I feel, I agree. They have their engineers and doing the work, that they're gonna feed us information, but none of us know this stuff.
Yep.
And so we need somebody working on our behalf that can interpret that, which I'm a little concerned now that somebody reviewed something in a site plan and fed it to the board, if I'm incorrect, so then the board is like, oh, yeah, stormwater's been reviewed. Why at the board would I think, if I got something from Chris Grobel or John I that said stormwater's approved, I'm not gonna know enough to look at that site plan and look, oh my gosh, that's not designed, I would have no clue. So I guess I feel like we need somebody on our behalf that's gonna be that person that can talk the lingo and then communicate with us if there are issues. So I don't know, that's
Well,
where,
we have a couple things we can do.
that's where I don't,
One is we could look at another consultant. This consultant, the council has used, so he was familiar with them in some time. That's why we looked at this. That was one that John and I had mentioned yesterday, was one to look at. The other was we could use our township engineer of record, because on this, they do the sewer, and have them take the information, distill it down for us. That's one way. I'm open to whatever.
right.
Because
Was that the intent initially to have John I review this with Chris? I mean, I kind of thought that's what we were,
Which? When you said,
well, I guess I thought John I was the initial contact, and I mean, I guess maybe the previous board could answer that more, where he was the one reviewing, saying, this is your special use permit, our nice 121-page document, and he's going through that saying, this point's been met.
You're correct.
And, okay, so John I was that person working on our behalf. So now I feel like, okay, there's been some gap. That's what I'm seeing, okay? And I don't know. Whose fault, I don't care right now. I just want to make sure we can resolve the problem and not have it happen again, and we go from here, and we move forward. So if John I is our contact with Chris on the environmental side of things for the stormwater or whatever that is, because I know you're going up weekly now, it sounds like, which was talked about, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, so he would then communicate with John I, and then we would get a communication back monthly. I mean, I
Well, I
agree.
think it's more often than that.
Whatever it is, if he's going up weekly, it's weekly. I mean, I'm just saying some kind of communication.
In a manner that's less engineering focused and more,
Issue. Stormwater
Common
has
sense.
been here, but it doesn't work.
whatever.
Chris Grobel, yeah, the seating's not there, we're gonna have a 95% failure rate whether everything else goes in or not. I mean, those kind of things that then say, ooh, red flag. Because when I read that special use permit, it's the board of trustees that's the responsible party here for a lot of this special use permit. So I feel like maybe there's been a little, whew, let's refocus and make sure we've communicated with our consultants that they understand what they're doing for us.
It's unfortunate, John couldn't make it tonight, we asked him to, and he had another engagement previously set. We would have liked to have him.
Yeah, absolutely.
No doubt about that. So I say, we can do that, we can do somebody
But I
else,
guess whatever.
we can do this. And Gordy had,
Well, I'm curious, does John and I have the capability, we're saying replace part of John, his firm's responsibility, and bring these people in to work with Dr. Goldman?
And we're saying both him and Dr. Goldman, this firm works for us as a board to help work these issues, design this, look at anything we need to look at.
Why?
That's just a suggestion.
I'm amazed, I mean, John and I's been through this from day one.
Well, he'll never be out of it, but it's just.
But now why, what is this person gonna add to the equation that John and I, who invested a lot of money in, who's probably read the 1,100-page document over time, to bring another person in, what would that add to the equation? Who suggested bringing in these guys?
We have, in two different correspondence to us from people, they had suggested maybe that's it. One, if you saw today, the Watershed Council suggested that. I think John Nelson's here tonight, right? I think that had been suggested by Watershed at one time to bring somebody else, independent person in to look at it.
We'll be preparing a letter that would state that.
Yeah, that's what I heard. And another one was another citizen group that had asked that it's part of the package. So I'm just saying, that is a way we could do it. It's not we have to, I'm just proposing that as.
To me, that's window dressing. Either John I and his organization have the wherewithal and the capability, or they don't. And if the answer is they don't, then we need to know that. If they do, why change horses in midstream?
I have a lot of confidence. When I say this, I have a lot of confidence in John and that team. They've been doing a lot of good work. We just offered it as another possibility.
Unless I hear something to the contrary, I would not support it through another.
Well, I'd just like to agree with Amy that John I was the one that everything was going through and was approving this and saying this. So having John I extracted from it it sure isn't what I want to see happen.
Okay. Thank you.
And I agree with Gordon too.
So, I'm trying to figure, I have no problem with John continuing to do it. I think what we're asking to do is have him put together for us some additional information, and as we get reports, condense them in a manner we can see them in a more understandable way, let's call it.
Or we tell him, we want him inspecting the site these times, this many times. We want to know and make sure this is being complied with based on the state that that project's in. So if we're at the stormwater area, then maybe it's going to be Chris that's up there. And then if we're getting pavement in it for that, then they, I mean, I'm not saying I have that expertise, I don't, but I just feel like we need to give a guideline saying, hey, John, we want you up there more than when there's a crisis. Okay, we're under crisis now, and I feel like we're reacting. I want to not have to react.
Ahead of the crisis.
Yes.
John should have been up there to begin with.
But I don't know that there's communications, I don't know. That's where I'm saying, let's make sure we communicate that with him so it's very clear. And so then there's no, and I don't know, I'm just saying, let's just make sure we communicate. And if Chris is going out during the stormwater process on a weekly basis, or a couple times depending on what works on his schedule, I mean, I don't know if we have to lay that out now, if we do that here, okay, this is reasonable, or if that is something that we meet with John I on a development of this scale,
I think we ought
what's
to
normal.
my suggestion is we meet with John.
John, okay.
Yes, I think we really do it. We can express better what we want. He can then help us, we together lay that out, whatever that is, that we're gonna do.
And
Yeah,
then
it's hard to do without him here to do that.
Can we have him at the, I realize you won't be here, but can we have him at the next meeting next Tuesday? And just,
we will try it. If he's available, we'll sure.
No.
We gotta push
I
on
think
it.
this is a big
Yeah, I agree with Gordy, but
issue, and if he's unavailable, that's telling. And although I just said we don't want to change horses midstream, I think that tells us something downstream. I'm not comfortable.
well, when I say that, I mean, I can't commit for somebody that, until I ask. Tonight, we thought he could be here, and he had another commitment, he just couldn't get out of it. I mean, it's like Chris talking about teaching in downstate, if we asked for Chris to be here tonight, pretty hard to get out of your teaching, wouldn't you say? For a day?
For you, Jay.
You do anything. That's great if you would, I'm glad, I mean, just saying.
Move mountains and keep sediment out of streams.
Good, good. So, yeah, we will make
Get your
every effort.
wellies on and.
We'll make every effort. I'm not trying to say you can't, I just, it's hard to commit for anybody else, so yes.
I think, from my perspective, and I agree with what I'm hearing here, I would really like to have John come on Tuesday with a proposal to us on how he is going to be the communicator ringleader for us and keep us updated. Not have a group discussion on how he should, but what is his proposal based on his best practices for his industry, and then we can see, hey, is that okay or not? I think that would be most efficient. And if he wants to send it to us in advance because the packet's already out, or put it right up with the packet, great, so that the public can see.
Packets out, so.
Yeah, put up online.
I have no problem with that. I'll be glad to talk to Johnny later tonight or tomorrow.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
No, that's good. Anything else?
Are you ready for public?
No, not.
Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate it, but we want to make sure we've
Yeah,
gone through
I
what we
understand
do,
that.
and then we can go on with the normal agenda and move on. Is there anything else on the board at this time? Do you think that's just the first step, and then we'll develop anything else we need?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I think that I got quite a bit from the public tonight was communication. And I think that maybe we need to add a little tab to our website if we're gonna start having reports. Public reports, if they're coming to the board, they are public information and they can be linked. I mean, it is the biggest development since probably the resort has gone in. It's a big impact on everyone. And so we've got nothing to hide. The developers, I feel, are trying to accommodate with some things that have happened. So it's not trying to smear mud to anybody. And I think that would be helpful for just everyone involved, you know? I don't know if that's possible with the web design or not, but it's
We
just
will look
another
at that.
link under the planning commission, because there's a Meyer archive.
We have a spot for that, so
Yeah.
we could
Just link it
to
on
go to
that.
that spot and put something in there.
Just a button.
Good, good.
Anything else on the board? Gordy?
Something that a few people brought up, and I thought of this also, was if there, certainly there's additional costs that's borne by the developer to, just have this problem. Elmer's is in there, 15 guys working overtime, yada, yada. So that's the cost he's bearing on this whole thing. Additional costs by the township. I'm not talking the fining and all that stuff, but just additional costs we're going to incur. How are we don't necessarily have to address it today, but I think we need to look at that and what kind of what's the best case, worst case of costs we're going to incur until we get to the point of saying, okay, everything looks fine, we're not going to have a doctor chomping through the mud out there taking a look at the site, because we're paying for that. We're not paying for that.
We do pay.
We do.
We do pay.
I gotta know we're not paying.
Is it not the case that that's passed on to the developer under the SUP or no?
There is certain things that would be passed on to the developer today. Some of our inspection work under our land use permit, we've been doing for sewer, and your work is being paid by the money we put back to do that inspection. We have a responsibility, I think, as a township, to do some of the inspection work.
Under the land use permit fee.
Yes,
There was a
and we put that fee
substantial land
aside. Well,
Why don't you explain to everybody, to me for probably the third time, as I still don't fully understand, this land use fee and
the land use fee on this project was pretty big. It's a big project. It's 160 some acres. And so when we got
182. Sorry, but it is.
the total one, but that's not the point we're doing at all. I said it's a large project. We got that permit, we put a lot of that permit money aside for inspection and work. One of the inspections we do is sewer line, because it'll be our sewer line, that's one example. One is some of the site inspection that Chris is making. We don't put John's data in there, but we do Chris. If Chris goes out, makes an inspection, we charge it for that inspection process.
you know, how much was that land use permit? How much?
It's 68,000 something. We put over 40,000 of it back just for inspections over a 2-year period. We designated it special, it's in our reserve process.
What I guess that we'd like on that is that if it's 62,000, keep a running count.
We have an actual Excel sheet
Someplace at the board meeting, let us know, are we in good shape on that, or projected costs over a period of time that that's supposed to cover, or not? You want any surprises? Okay, so of the 62K, part of that cost, you receive that, is to pay for inspections, the same thing.
Like I said, I have an Excel sheet, I check every one of those again so we can track it and make sure that it's a.
Is that why you set up this committee?
That's some of the committee.
It's on the president's report side.
Okay. Okay, anything else?
Just a quick last comment. I know we're all community members here. I got a phone call from a personal friend of mine who lives in Traverse City, but she and her husband have property up north of Torch on East Grand Traverse Bay, and it was all over up there too. So this goes way beyond our community, and it's something we really need to face forward on and get after. So.
Agree. Okay, anything else on the board tonight? Okay. At this time, we will open them back to the public for the last public comment session of the night. We appreciate everybody coming. It's a critical issue to all of us. We've got to get things fixed, we've got to get things moving, we've got to get things right. John?
Okay. Just a couple of final thoughts, I guess. If you, well, going forward, you should perhaps consider when you grant these large developments permissions that you should have some mechanism where if they violate some of the aspects of it, that there's additional charge so that you can afford additional help in some ways if you desire it. And my second thought is that weather is getting a little more erratic than in the past. And I guess this was a project that was designed to a 25-year storm system, is that correct? Perhaps you should kick all the projects up to a 50-year or 75-year storm so that the engineers understand that it has to be designed better and that they're held to that higher standard so that it's automatic that it's taken care of perhaps.
Thank you. I would like to, Brian, thank you and your team for being here tonight.
You're welcome.
Brian offered to do that. Didn't know everybody else was going to be here, but we appreciate that. It helps us all understand the process of what goes on. Any other comment? Brian?
The status updates will be great. It would be nice to see those if we actually get formal reports. But I know as we get inches of rain in the coming weeks, a lot of us are going to be wondering, well, what's going on out there? And so almost getting like a blog-like status update of, hey, is it running clear? Is it good? Is it bad? What's going on today? Because I know messages are going to be flying back and forth on a daily basis here. So, you know, not hearing anything for weeks or months at a time, a lot of us are going to be very concerned about how things are going out there. So I'd really like to encourage a very effusive sort of release of information there. You know, and that way we're not down here every day filing FOIA requests to get the stuff anyway, because that's what's going to happen. The question I didn't hear answered today is basin number 2 was not completed, and I don't believe I ever heard why that basin wasn't done.
I think it was said earlier, at the time it wasn't, it is now completed. Steve Fulkerson, when was it completed, Steve?
The basin was dug probably right after site balance was complete, so probably 6-7 weeks ago. We had the liner guys scheduled to put liner in. They did bait the one basin. And since that time, we've had rain and no way to dry that up other than pump it to some other location on the site, build a temporary pond, muck it out, put sand back in it, get it dried up, get them to come, it rains. We've been through that process multiple times, and basically with this 10-day window that we had, or 8-day window that we had, we were able to get the liner in, get the sand on it, get the top of it topsoiled, so it's completed. But it has been dug as long as the other ones have been dug. There was 170,000 yards of dirt that came out of there, so we couldn't balance the site without digging it. So that was basically one of the big areas that we first dug out. And so to say it hasn't been done, it was done and it was shaped. It was dug and it was shaped, just doesn't have a liner in it.
But without a liner and the other features, it's not a functional basin, isn't that correct?
It holds water.
It's got clay. It's got clay bottom, but it does hold water.
You know, I hear a lot
The liner's not holding the water.
I heard a lot of finger pointing here tonight, and I heard suggestions that John and I could kind of manage some of this, but I know that he's involved in some finger pointing too here, of who approved what and when, and what was being approved there. And I sort of see a need here for a third party. I don't want to spend that money, and I don't think the township should pay for it, but with all the finger pointing, a very capable third party who's going to give us the unvarnished truth about what's going to happen here. And they're not worried because at this point, they're not going to get sued over this probably, where John and I, Pittsburgh may get sued before things are done here. And so asking him to manage this process for us going forward has certain risks. And I think, that puts him in an awkward position. I think John's a great guy, respect the man, but, he is, like everyone else who's been involved in this project, that has a certain exposure here. And I think we need somebody, unfortunately, to step in who can not be exposed in that sense.
Thank you for your comments.
Finally, I have a question for Dr. Grobel. You said we have no pollution plan in the stormwater treatment system. Knowing what we know now, both about that and the things that we have seen, is the original design even going to work for us? Should we even be going to that design, or does that original design, does that need to be changed? Do you think?
A couple questions there. The pollution incident prevention plan was one of a number of things on the list, and I'll get it back from Gordy, that the board approved as a conditional set of conditions for approval. One of them was that if there was a diesel spill on the parking lot, there'd be a way to catch that on the parking lot rather than having to try to catch it in the ponds, down the way, in the creek, basic stuff like that. After the site plan approval process, I haven't really been involved in this at all. I haven't seen that document. If it exists, somebody, show it to me, but I haven't seen it. That was my point. The second point, will it work? We have a very challenging site, like the site across the road that was abandoned 10 years ago, which had problems. This one is very difficult site, and because it's clay. So, I think, and you said you wanted unvarnished truth. I've tried to give you that tonight from my perspective, wherever that falls. But there will be continued issues on this site. This is going to be a difficult site. And I think relying on the basins to solve the problem is not your solution. Your solution is getting that site stabilized upstream. And I tried to say that very clearly. So, you can, and the meeting yesterday people did, they talked for a long time about fixes at the end of the pipe, and I had to interrupt and say, no, let's stop this discussion, let's go back to the real issue, which is the source. So, we have commitments now that the source area is going to be stabilized, and that's the thing, for me, I'd like to keep an eye on, make sure that actually happens.
Yeah, one down here, we'll come back to the board and go.
Great, I'll be brief. A few key points. First of all, that was great, Jay, how you thanked Brian and Dr. Grobel. Both of you have taken a lot of heat here, and Dr. Grobel, you were the only one that apologized and took flat-out responsibility. I think that's big of you. Here, I'm disappointed not to see the county soil erosion department, so we can see if they're in agreement with the team approach here. Trustee Ackerman, I think you alluded to that. What is the team approach? So let me digress just for a moment. Historically, the drain commissioners, my neck was on the table here. I handled soil erosion and stormwater. The county made a decision to separate all this out. The county got out of the stormwater business and said, now it's the township's responsibility, and I warned them when they made that decision, it was a split decision. Do you really want to do this while the Meyer project and while the Board of Dam project is going on? So I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking. I warned them about this, and so your burden is real. This was too quick, too soon for this community to have to take this on. But nonetheless, looking ahead rather than blame solutions is, like Trustee Ackerman said, and I'm hearing from the developer, to get this team approach, get soil erosion, the stormwater people, and then the DEQ has the National Permit Pollution Discharge Elimination System responsibility. Those are your three key players. It used to just be two, the Drain Commission and the DEQ. So I'm confident if you get that team approach, you'll get this solved.
Thank you.
This is actually, and it's a question, maybe for either one of you, I'm not sure. But wouldn't the pollution control, if it's in the pavement or the parking lot, it would be for that not this developer, but the individual store? So when Meyer came in and they had a parking lot plan, the parking lot would be doing their catch basins. That's not their responsibility, if I'm incorrect, because they own that site, correct? And so now if we have another developer coming in, the housing, if they're going to do a pollution control, if it's parking lots, should it not be on their site plan that we should be seeing the pollution control, not necessarily with the big overall? Is that correct, or no?
If I may, really quickly, this is
Sure.
really Jeff's answer, but when we did the site plan review, it was for that whole site plan. And the requirement was for that entire proposal as in front of the community. So that means, yes, all of them would have to update, do additional planning, all that stuff. Anybody down the road would not be exempt from those requirements. Those are all the same.
Meyer actually has a plan.
But they would be the one providing it. See, that's where I see, I think it would be Meyer or whoever the company is coming in would give us that pollution control.
Going forward, that may be the case, or it's a consistent one that gets approved and that gets applied to every.
Okay, this is what
I
you're
don't-
gonna do, got it.
I'm not
Okay,
certain.
no, I'm asking, yeah.
the
I can
best
say from the-
scenario for that. What I would want, just to go backwards though, remember the site plan approval in 2012 was for phase 1 of the VGT. Phase 1 of the VGT was the Meyer store, those roads, stormwater, sewer, water, I'm certainly missing things. But so it was all one, there was no separate Meyer approval, that was the Meyer approval.
Sure, that was
So
part of
those were all combined.
Okay.
Now, that Meyer has a land use permit that they
Right, that's-
acquired they acquired because of the site plan approval.
Okay.
So their land use permit is under that 2012 site plan
Site
approval.
plan. All right, so
So
pollution
those
control,
two are
when
tied
would
in.
that, okay, so when would that come in?
When would this plan be?
Mhm.
Today? I don't know.
I have it on my list, Amy, to find
Okay,
out.
I'm just.
That's a fair question. I know we've seen it on some things, and we'll make sure that we find it. Okay. Jean? Second. Go ahead.
Can I add a thought on this subject again? Did you say, Jay, that John I knows this individual?
John, I know that Jeff has worked with him on another project. That's all I
Okay.
said.
Just a quick comment. There may be a need and a desire after, we've sink since for a few days to really consider a third-party person to come in. But with all due respect to John Michelangeli and anyone else who may know this person, it would be nice to have someone that isn't really known to thought, doesn't come in and stay there forever, but is hired to strictly look at the plan and say, yep, I concur, and out, and let the team continue. Just an idea. I mean, personally, I've done that in my professional past, but, there might be a good home for this person, but it truly should be independent, not somebody that's partnered with any of our immediate team members as we look going forward.
Okay. I've got two more comments.
I promise I'll be
Virginia,
quick.
you before Paul, so you're first.
I want to thank everyone for their concern and candor tonight, and I appreciate some of the approaches that you'll be taking, especially communicating. I feel that a huge violation of trust on this project right now, and I'm not going to point fingers or blame, it's all been discussed, and it just seems like there were a few simple things that anywhere along the way, I think Dr. Grobel, or maybe it was Jeff Jackson, one of you said, well, there should be 3 safeguards. When you're forming your plan, there shouldn't be, sure, there should be one person in charge, but there should be a number of checks and balances so that all of that information is available. So for instance, who's reviewing this log? I mean, I was a special ed teacher and I had to write up stuff like this all the time, and it was the bane of my existence. But what's the purpose of this log? And so as you're, forming this plan, please think of checks and balances and open communication. If the DEQ guys are still here, I really appreciate it. I talked to those guys 3 times in the last 8 days. I've left 3 calls for the county, and they have not returned my call. And probably one day next week, I'll just camp outside their office. But we, as taxpayers and community members, we should not have this problem again with this project. It's 182 acres. It's bigger than anything north of Grand Rapids. It's bigger than Grand Traverse Mall and the Grand Traverse crossings put together. We already know it's forever changing the face of Acme. We have a plan, let's get it in place, and make absolutely certain that it's done right. Thank you.
If you do want a copy of this later,
No, it's
glad to
okay.
provide it. Okay. Just so everybody knows, it is public knowledge. Paul, you had a comment, real quick.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, that clay is suspended in the creek. How long will it take it to flush?
Who knows? I mean, it'll acclimate over time, but it's
It
moving.
doesn't keep flowing?
It'll flow out into the bay and it'll acclimate along the shoreline. I mean, there's no real way to recover it, but at some point it'll stick to things and it'll go through the ecological process, but it still has an impact on that ecology,
Yeah.
so that's what the concern is.
Do I have a motion from the board to approve, adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Question? All in favor, say aye.
I know, I was surprised by your saying I remember being on there with you. That was so different. Great.